I started recording now. Hopefully the next video, this video will be better in terms of sound. Anyways, Nadine or anybody who has difficulties in hearing the videos that are uploaded and you have some doubts or anything, you can just write me and then maybe we can discuss it directly. So today, last session of topics. And then next week we meet again, but it's not mandatory. It's just for going over doubts or reviewing topics and contents, but no more, nothing more. And then I suppose that Stefan Pramsoller will get in contact with you, unless he already did, and he'll tell you how it works with the following phase. He wrote me a week ago, so I suppose that he'll get in contact. So let me share my screen with you. Yeah, this one. Let's go. So today we see the last topics are neuromuscular disorders and cognitive disorders. They are less like the neuromuscular disorders or diseases are less frequent than other diseases that we've seen before, but they can happen also in the early ages. So remember that we discussed about cardiovascular, we discussed about pulmonary that are more typical in elderly or advanced age. And then we have discussed last week about diseases that may happen also in adulthood and a bit in young adults, etc., like rheumatoid arthritis and this stuff, depending on what kind of issue you have or what you're doing in your life. Like a sportsman are more affected by osteoarthritis and this stuff. And the neuromuscular diseases are can affect anybody, but in many cases you'll see that they appear they may appear in early ages. Some more specific than others. For instance, muscular dystrophy is a disease that appears mostly or only in early ages, and actually the life expectancy is maximum up to 30 years of age. So far. Epilepsy also usually is caused by something that happens in early ages, even if also in adulthood and in elderly there are events that can happen and trigger epilepsy. We are not talking about all of them, but we are discussing some of them, how they work in our body, what they do in our body. In general, recommendations are pretty similar to what we've seen before in terms of exercising. Anyways, neuromuscular diseases are not that common. They are diseases in which there is a problem in our nerves, the nerves that control our muscle, and therefore we have a less quality of, less reduced ability to control our muscles. And what happens when, for instance, we don't have any more contact with the muscles, or we are unable to send information to the muscles so for them to move, the muscles stop really working, and eventually they start dying, they start wasting away, so getting smaller and smaller because they aren't used, and little by little they basically die. Obviously this is very dangerous for us because in some cases it can be as simple as affecting our lower limbs or upper limbs, but consider this, that our lungs also work thanks to muscles. Our heart also works thanks to muscle. So in certain cases, when those muscles specifically are affected also by these diseases, then we have a big issue. And actually, in many of those cases, it leads to death, unfortunately. It's the case of muscular dystrophy, it's the case of multiple sclerosis, is the case of some of those diseases in which progressive diseases in which our ability to control muscle gets worse and worse until it firstly affects voluntary muscles and then reaches also those other muscles that we need for living. So our heart stops beating, our lungs stop breathing properly, and we have a bunch of other issues. As I say, they are not really, this group of diseases is not that present. It's not that often that we find cases of that, but if you put all together all these diseases, the group of diseases as a group, they are considerable, especially those that are affected by aging, those few that are affected by aging, such as Parkinson or Alzheimer. But in general, taken one by one, they are not that common. Just see that, for instance, in general, 0.5 to 10 individuals every 100,000 really in the world suffer from one neuromuscular disease. So it's not that huge, the amount of people that suffer from it. However, there is a lot of unknown stuff about it, because if you have made some research, and they say that less than 50%, there are 7,315 phenotypes that are associated with rare neuromuscular diseases, but we could map the genes only in less than 50% of them. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of research and practice to understand how these diseases work, why they happen. In most cases, they are related to genetics, and therefore the genetic development, so the mapping of the human gene is basically the only way to advance in this. The knowledge of it is the main way to advance in the understanding of these diseases. Let me go firstly to those that I really want to talk about, and then if we have time, we also go to the others. But obviously, you have them there for reading all of them if you want, if you're interested. Can you see still the presentation, guys? Okay.
Yeah.
So spinal cord disabilities. Why I want to talk about this rather than other diseases first, because among the neuromuscular diseases, these type of disabilities may happen often, or may happen more often, because they are caused by different things, not only by, mostly not by genetics, but by actually accidents or traumas and this stuff. So as you sure know, spinal cord disabilities are refer to those issues that we have when nerves in our spinal canal don't work anymore, or cannot take the information from our brain to the rest of the body. So if there is a damage in the spinal cord, our ability to control what's below the damage is either null or very reduced. Unfortunately, we discussed it before, but there is not much that so far we can do about regenerating nerves. Is one of some of the body tissues that we still haven't learned to rebuild somehow. So when there is an injury, a serious injury that cuts off completely the connection between two parts or two sides of a nerve, research is working on it, but it's still not possible to get fully or back the control of the body below the damage. There are different types of spinal cord disability or spinal cord damages. For instance, there are those that are incomplete. You have a bunch of nerves going down the spinal canal, and they start from the central nervous system. They go down to in the spinal channel, and then they start splitting to reach all the parts of our body. Depending where the damage happens, then we may have a paralysis, we may have reduced control, etc. In the case of incomplete damages, is when there is still the nerves are not completely cut off, but they are damaged. So we still have the ability to control our body more or less in full, but we are affected in terms of how much we can control it, or the level of precision by which we can control it. These are the mildest among the injuries in the spinal cords. Then there's the complete. The complete are those when we have completely cut off the nerves in the spinal cord. In that case, there is no control anymore, or no sensations, no feelings below the damage point. So there is no more contact between the part of the nerve that is above the damage, and no contact with the below part. So basically, if we send an information, it stops in the point of the cutoff, and there is no way we can control below that. Obviously, among the complete damages, it's a huge role plays where the damage happened. if it happened in the thorax, or if it happened close to the neck, or if it happened below the belly button, etc., it may change completely our control of the body. If the lowest it happened, the more control we have of the body, the upper part, but also not only in terms of muscles, but also in terms of, for instance, bladder. So control of our urination, control of our other needs, etc. Also, sexual functionality depends on where the damage happens. It may be still controlled or not, etc. And then there are others like that are not less common, but they may happen. One is called anterior cord syndrome. In this case, is the anterior part of the cord that is affected. So only the part that is towards our internal body, the anterior, is affected, is broken. And there are still some sensations that we can still feel below that, like, for instance, under a sensation of proprioceptive sensations, understanding the position and movement of the muscles. Vibrations below the point of rupture is still felt because those nerves are intact because they are in the posterior part of the channel, but motion is reduced or completely absent, and other sensations such as pain or temperature, we don't feel them anymore. So like pain, no feel. Temperature, if there is a high temperature and we're burning, we don't feel it. There is a central cord syndrome, is when the cut or the damage happens in the nerves in the center. And then we have upper body motor skills that are not moving anymore. So the arms are paralyzed, and legs are working, but there is less ability to control them. And finally, there is the so-called Brown-Séquard syndrome, and it's a damage on a side of the spinal cord, so either left or right, meaning that we have a paralysis on one side, but the other side is completely functional. This is important for us mainly because depending on where and how the damage happens, our strategies for working out with people changes completely. Going directly to that, because most of the causes of spinal cord injuries are a part of birth injuries, like wrong manipulation during birth, etc. The typical are accidents. So motor vehicle accidents are very, very common, unfortunately. In some cases, the diving accident, when you jump in the water, don't realize that the water is shallow or there is a rock, etc. So mostly accidents provoke this kind of issues. So for us, what's the point? What are the main points in terms of guidelines? In general, they suggest to have physical activity like every other healthy person, especially in those parts that are of the body that are still completely functional. If there is a reduced functionality, for instance, an impairment, like as we were saying in the anterior spinal cord disability or the central spinal cord disability, leaves us the possibility to use the legs, but with an impairment. So there are recommendations: aerobic training, moderate to high intensity, resistance training, 70–80% of the maximum possibility. They are very similar in general to the typical recommendation. And a very important thing that I wanted to stress here, and that's why I went directly to spinal cord disability, is that the problem in many cases is that if you know people, unfortunately, I have friends who had accidents and are without the functionality of legs. Obviously, when you for a long time don't use your legs or you don't use a part of your body, they become very, very small, very, very thin, because muscles waste away. And there are problems related to that, including the ability to control certain other parts of certain other internal organs. So one of the main recommendations in practice is to try and prevent on those parts that are not really working well, the atrophy, so the atrophy of the muscle, the impossibility of the muscle to work out, and osteoporosis, which comes together because bone density depends on how much effort we put on those bones. If we don't use those bones, it's more complicated. So there are a couple of recommendations. Among them, if you haven't read it, the electrical system. So the functional electrical stimulation. Are you familiar with those devices, guys?
Yes.
So there are people who use them even normally. I don't know. I like to talk about it because it's a huge, it's not a myth, but it's a huge argument of discussion also for people who don't have a spinal cord disability. Like there are some people who like to work out this way. So you're sitting in your office and you are meanwhile doing abdominals because you have your stuff plugged on your abdominals. There are also commercial those abdominals in 7 minutes and this stuff that offer you to build abdominals without putting any effort. What do you guys think about, not about spinal cord disabilities, but in general about the use of electrical stimulation? If you have used it, if you know about something about it because you studied it or because you heard about it, what's your opinion on the use of those in healthy people in general? It's a question. Yeah, there are plenty of healthy people who use the electrical stimulation.
Yes, but I think it's another way of getting people to work out. Most of them who do the EMS training, in my experience, they would also benefit from training without this.
Why?
I think it's a good, how do I say it?
Support?
I think, yes.
Oh no.
Did I understand?
Yeah, I think so. Like you're saying that there are people, like those who use electrical stimulation, they should also do other things, not only electrical stimulation. Is it that what you say?
Yes.
Any other opinion regarding electrical stimulation?
Yeah, I think, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Oh, okay. I think after an injury, it's maybe not so bad to have electrical stimulation.
Okay.
Like, for example, if you have an ACL rupture or something in your knee and you're not able, like right after the operation, you're not able to move the leg that much or to put so much, I don't know, put so much movement in the leg. It's maybe not so bad to keep the muscles a bit stimulated.
Okay, thank you. Others? What happens when we use functional electrical stimulation? What we do mostly is that we are basically, the muscles are contracting, right? Because the muscles in our body work like an electrical circuit. We send out an electrical stimulation from the brain, goes down the nerve, reaches the muscle contracts. So the devices for electrical stimulation basically substitute the work of the brain. And that's the good and the thing of it, and the bad of it. The good is, as Merle said, it's wonderful when you can use it, or also Karina said that it's wonderful when you can use it as a support. Like if you're a healthy person and you have an injury, for instance, or cannot really use for a certain period that part of your body as a substitute for that specific short period, it's good because you are keeping your muscle working. You still lose some muscle, but you are at least stimulating it to the fibers to work out. And this is very good in general too, if you use it. But some people exceed in using that or use that without any real reason, like an injury. And the problem is that precisely the same problem as I just said before about the positive things, like it substitutes the brain stimulation. So our muscles work well also because they learn to understand, like our brain, our muscle work in synergy. It's like you want to play with a teammate, let's say beach volleyball. You are two players. You want to play together, but you never really play together because you play with an hologram of your teammate because your teammate is not there. So you use a sort of, imagine like the future, you can use an hologram of your teammate. The hologram will never be like your teammate in real. Do you follow me?
Yes.
So like the brain and the muscles work in synergy. If you're removing one part of the equation, yeah, the muscle still works, but it doesn't learn to work with the brain messages. So it's a risk in that sense. In that sense, like it's not recommended to abuse of it because it's actually making the brain lazier to control the muscle and the muscle less effective to respond to brain messages. This is for healthy people. For people with spinal cord disability, but pretty much works the same as Meryl stressed out for injured people. You can't use that part, unfortunately. So you can use it as a support for at least only for that part or those parts of the body that you cannot control anymore. It won't make much, like it won't keep your muscle in perfect conditions, obviously. Your muscle will still waste away because there are many other things. It's not that the muscle receive a message from the brain only when we want to move them. The muscle tone, the muscle usually keeps a tone when it's at rest, and that tone is controlled by stimulation just below the limit of contraction. But it helps a lot. One of the things that I found out just checking information on this is, yes, it's very useful, but in many cases, research has shown that it's not really working that well, but not because it's not good as a device. It's more because people would have to use it every day also at home. And it's very complicated. Apparently, the learning curve to use it properly, it's longer according to research. So sometimes it takes just too much time, unless you have the possibility to go every day to a physiotherapist or a specialist, it's more complicated. And the part is usually they are expensive. So again, if you have the possibility to go to a physiotherapist every day and do it every day, wonderful. But you would have to do it repeatedly at home or repeatedly every day, and that specific hour with the physiotherapist wouldn't be enough. So it's rather, they recommend rather to use other things like manipulation, for instance, like having a second person helping you out, moving the muscles, manipulating them, etc. Because it might be a bit less effective, but you can do it at home every day. For the rest, the recommendations are the same as for everybody, like working out those parts that you can work out without any restriction. The only thing that you have to really take care of is, for instance, dysreflexia. Dysreflexia is a, sorry, my kids just came back from the daycare. I hope that they won't crash the party. Dysreflexia is a sudden increase in the blood tension that is very common in spinal cord disabilities, especially those that happen about at the thorax level. So in that case, there might be a sudden increase in the tension, in the blood tension, because of the problem of controlling the sympathetic nervous system. And the person all of a sudden gets this increase in the blood tension that is very high, and that is dangerous for the person to continue being active. How do you realize that in practice? Well, first of all, you know that if you know that you're working with a person with spinal cord disability, especially those from thorax or upper than thorax, be aware that this can happen often. Second, so if you're working with them, they come to you for exercising, you have to know that you have to check for those symptoms. Among those main symptoms of dysreflexia, there is, for instance, the face all of a sudden flashes, becomes very red, extremely high sweating right above the point of the spinal cord damage, and extremely cold skin and body right below the part of the spinal cord damage. These are just a couple of examples of what you can see if the person has dysreflexia. Another thing is checking the heart rate. Anyways, the heart rate is very important to be checked during exercise. When the heart rate all of a sudden goes down, like slows down a lot, it might be a sign of dysreflexia. So very, very warm skin above the damage, very cold skin below the damage, face skin that becomes all of a sudden red, extremely high sweating, heart rate that goes down. What else? I think that these are among the major symptoms. Also pulsating headache. You know, when the person tells you, hey, I really feel like headache, but you know that pulsating headache, like that person tells you that it feels like the veins pumping strong in their head. That's also another sign. So in general, everything, but with a very good eye on heart rate always, because also the response to exercise may change. Yeah, like you, like my wife who hit her head last time, but no, it's not exactly the same. It's the wall that got damaged. Anyway, so if extremely high attention on the heart rate, and so in that case, if dysreflexia happens, immediately stop exercising. Like, that's too risky. That's the most important thing. Questions about this? Let me go to, okay. So a couple more that I think are very important are muscular dystrophy and Parkinson's disease in this field. How does muscular dystrophy works? Are you familiar with a spring, guys? You know a spring? Not spring, the season? A spring. Those things that have, they are metal things, and they are like in spirals, and they have hooks on both sides. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
You know, two hooks, metal hooks, and then spirals, and then you hook it on one side, you hook it on the other side, and the spiral gets smoother to hold two things together. This is pretty much how dystrophin looks like. Dystrophin is a protein that we have in our muscles, in our myocytes, our muscle fibers. It's essential for the muscle to work. If we don't have dystrophin, the muscle stops working. And that's the center of the muscular dystrophy problem. Like, dystrophin looks like a spring.
Hello?
Can you hear me, guys?
Mm.
You can hear me, right? Tell me something. You can hear me? No,
Yes.
you can't. My connection is unstable, and it's mutters. Probably, you know, the cows stopped moving the electricity, and the electricity went down, and the internet went down. If you don't hear me well, just stop or just please tell me. Anyways, so dystrophin is pretty much like a spring. How is it in our fibers? One side of the spring is hooked to the membrane of the fiber, of the muscle fiber, and the other side, and the other hook is hooked, sorry, to the basically the main internal structure of the muscle. And it's essential because it keeps the two structures together, and it's a sort of protective form for the muscle not to get destroyed when it contracts. You with me, guys? Christoph?
Sí,
You are my yes man today? Okay.
yes, sí, sí, claro.
So in some cases, for some reason that are mostly genetic, the dystrophin is either not present or doesn't work well. For instance, there are two main cases, two most common cases of muscular dystrophy. One is the Duchenne. In the Duchenne, one of the hooks does not exist. So imagine a spring that you want to with which you want to hook two parts, and one hook is not present. What happens? The spring doesn't work. It's just hanging from one side, but it cannot hook from the other side. That's the Duchenne syndrome. Is when our dystrophin cannot get hooked usually to the external membrane, so it doesn't work. And then there is the Becker. The Becker is a milder version of muscular dystrophy, and it happens when the spirals of the spring are less than we should have. What happens what's the difference between a spring with a lot of spirals and the spring with just few spirals? What's the difference? You know, I'm talking about a spring, like a metal thing. Merle, you want to say something?
Yeah, the more of this, I don't know, spins you have, the more elastic it is.
The more, sorry?
The more elastic it is.
Elastic, correct. The smoother, when you pull from the spring, the more spirals it has, the smoother it is, the softer it is. When you put just a few spiral and you try to make the same movement, it's harder to move, right, guys? So
Yes.
the spirals for dystrophin are called spectrin units. It's just the name it's just the name that they have, and they are like attached one after another, one after another. In Becker syndrome, those units are way less than they should be, meaning that the dystrophin is, yes, hooked with the membrane and with the internal part, but it's way more rigid. So you don't actually lose completely the control of muscles, but you have a very bad control of the muscle because of the stiffness of this dystrophin. Little by little, this stiffness gets into muscle rupture, and then eventually the final result is exactly as for Duchenne syndrome, unfortunately, death. But it's milder the way in which it happens. What happens when and in any case, when the dystrophin is not working well, the muscle contracts, but when it contracts, since it's not protected by the dystrophin, there are parts of the external membrane that break. So since they are broken, there is let's say a hole in the membrane of the muscle fibers. And in that case, two things happen. One is that there is calcium outside the membrane that we usually use is good for the muscle, but it's entering and out of the membrane is controlled. When there is a broken part of the membrane, there is an open door for the calcium to enter, and the calcium starts destroying also the healthy fibers of the muscle. Are you with me, guys?
Yes.
This is one thing, and the other thing, so the calcium gets in and starts destroying the fibers. And the other thing is the creatine kinase. You know, the creatine kinase is an essential enzyme that the muscle use for ATP. So the creatine kinase is not really happy to be in the muscle, but it has to be in the muscle because the membrane is closed. Now you open the membrane and all the creatine kinase get crazy. Yeah, it's like lockdown is over, no more COVID, and they all go out of the membrane. So we have less creatine kinase in the muscle, meaning that we have less opportunity to create ATP inside the muscle, meaning that we have less energy at our disposition to contract the muscles. This is why it is progressive, and this is why it doesn't kill a person immediately or is not evident immediately, but the muscles start having one rupture, then two ruptures, then three ruptures, and at the same time we are aging. At the early ages, we are able to regenerate muscle, so it's less evident. But as we age, our muscle regeneration is getting lower and lower, so there are fibers that are destroyed and cannot be regenerated. Instead of the fibers, we usually appears fat or other stuff that is not at all contractile. So the muscle stop contracting, the contraction ability of the muscle is reduced until there is no more ability of contraction and the person dies, because that affects also heart muscle and lung muscle. Guys, you with me?
Yeah.
So usually it happens in early ages, and this is a genetic defect, like the inability of our body to produce dystrophin in a proper way. It's genetic, and happens only, or 99.9999999% of cases are male. Females, like women, can have muscular dystrophy, but they don't have it, like they are silent vehicle of it. So probably if they have a kid and the kid is a boy, the boy is likely can have the muscular dystrophy, but they won't show any sign of it. Why? Because usually because the production of dystrophin is in a gene that is allocated in the X chromosome, and females have 2 X chromosomes. So if you have 1 X chromosome that is not working well and the other is working well, you don't really see the difference. So it's a silent vehicle. The woman has the problem, the genetical problem, but it's covered up by the other X chromosome that's working well. In males, it's different. We have a XY, so, and precisely that part that works for creation of dystrophin is in the part that we don't have in the Y chromosome. So if the X chromosome is not working well, we don't have the other X chromosome. We have the Y chromosome, which does not produce dystrophin. So we have muscular dystrophy. Few cases, women may have mild symptoms, but it never leads to death, and it's not really evident. Like it's unlikely that a person even realizes, a female really realizes she has muscular dystrophy. There might be very mild cases, but it doesn't develop. In the case of male, it develops and it leads to death. So far, there is no way that we can stop it. We can. Why do we talk about it in physical activity or exercising if there is no way to stop it? Because there are plenty of ways to reduce the effect of it, to have the patients have a better quality of life until the moment in which they are not able anymore to do anything. Some of the typical symptoms that you see, you can see them in early ages. For instance, children that are affected by this problem are late walkers. Now you have a late walker, that doesn't mean that the kid has muscular dystrophy, but late walkers are it's a symptom, it's a possible factor. In toddlers, there is this thing that is called pseudo hypertrophy or false enlargement. So they have very big calves, but they are not muscles. It's just it's a false hypertrophy. Then there are, in preschoolers, for instance, very uncoordinated movements, frequent falls, bless you, Gesundheit, difficulty raising the arms. And we are talking about children, like it appears immediately. And then in some cases, cramps, pain, etc. But all these symptoms gets worse and worse, bless you again, get worse over and over as the person grows old. And as I said, the life expectancy for this disease is 30 years of age. But many have difficulties in passing the 21st year of age. I have when I was a tennis player, the director of the club I was playing in, the wife was a silent vehicle of muscular dystrophy. They had a kid. He had muscular dystrophy. Unfortunately, at the age of 18, he died. They had then a daughter. The daughter is in perfect condition, doesn't have anything. Maybe, probably, not sure 100%, but she might be a silent vehicle of muscular dystrophy that will be known only if she has sons. But she is in perfect conditions. We do not know because it depends on the X chromosome, like if she has affected it or if not. It's not necessarily, not always she has it affected because the mother has it, but she is in perfect condition anyways. That's good. Guidelines for us: 10 minutes and then little by little increase to 20 minutes. We're talking about persons already at a later stage. In early stages, they are kids. You mostly want them to be active as much as they can. Depending on how strong is the disease at early ages, you may want them to participate in disabled sports, or in wheelchair sports, etc., or impaired sports. As long as they're active, regardless how, it's important to have them being active. So if they are particularly affected, start with 10 minutes and then little by little increase to 20. Low, moderate resistance training. Exercising alone is not really recommended, nor working in humid weather because the effort for the muscle is even worse. So we have to take care of this particularity. Humid weather, hot weather, try to avoid exercising in those conditions. If the weather is just like that, maybe you prefer to be inside and work out in a gym with controlled air system rather than outside. Now this is not a big issue, but when I was teaching in Texas, the hot humid weather is kind of basically, I'm talking about 11 months a year. So that's a big issue depending also on the geography where you live. Main activity goals are improving functional capacity. Like they are little by little losing their ability to move their muscles. So what you want to really to do, what's your objective as a trainer in physical activity is to try and keep their functionality at the maximum as they can. Because one of the issues is they stop being able to use their muscle little by little, and also psychologically speaking, that's has a huge impact. Imagine that you used to do this, this, and this, and now you can't do it anymore. It's very tough, especially for a kid or an adolescent. All your classmates can do everything, and you used to do those things and now can't do it anymore. So maintaining functionality, so to give them a feeling of self-care is very important. In general, actually, physical activity is used to increase self-worth. Like I feel that I'm worthy. I feel that I can do things. In practice, depending on how the person is affected, and depending on how affected are the muscles of the lungs and heart, frequent breaks, group activities because of the social impact. So it's very important for the kids, since they are young persons, to participate in group activities, team activities where they can socialize. Wheelchair sports are encouraged in case they have difficulties, not only if they can't use their legs, but also if they have impaired use of their legs because of the disease. And according to research, moderate intensity, low resistance exercise are very good for patients with muscular dystrophy. So what we have to focus on is reducing the degeneration process. In Becker disease, the one in which the units are less, but there are the two hooks, it's easier. In Duchenne syndrome, it's more complicated because unfortunately it's very difficult to use the muscle when you don't have one of the hooked to the membrane. So anyways, mobility and flexibility, muscular tone, training of the core, postural training. So for balance is essential, because as you lose the ability to control your body, also the balance is affected. And if the balance is affected, then it's difficult also for the person to do anything else. We have a new student here. Say hi. And finally, when the person cannot perform any movement or the movement in a full way anymore, we can still work with them, but we need some support. So either ourselves as trainers or with the support of someone else, to complete the exercise, have someone who helps the person finish the movement. But it's important to keep moving. The one thing that you have to take care of is pain and fatigue. Especially fatigue is a symptom that we want to be. Bless you again. Vuoi anche tu ascoltare, tieni. Especially fatigue is a symptom that we want to keep under control. Not that they cannot feel fatigue, but we have to keep it under control, because when it's too high, it may affect the muscles too much. Questions? If there are no questions, I'll go to Parkinson's disease. Tell me, Maria. Not even my students want to listen to me, and you want to listen to me? Okay. Are you okay? Yeah, but this is not this. Take this. Okay, hold it. Hold it. All right. So Parkinson's disease, and then we go into the other group of diseases, the cognitive. is a disorder in which we have a part of our brain that produces dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. This neurotransmitter, we need it for basically the neurons to work properly and control properly our movements. And there is a very small part of our brain, really very small, it's called substantia nigra, that produces dopamine. Other than that, there are no other parts of our brain that. Thank you, Maria. Go with mommy. Next week I'm in the office, so that won't happen. There is only one other part of our brain that produces dopamine, but the main part is the substantia nigra. So in some cases, we have a problem of production of dopamine in the substantia nigra for an injury, for a virus, for anything. Christoph, you are my yes man. You cannot yawn.
No,
Just kidding.
difficult.
Just kidding. And so for some reason, our
Not because of you.
Nah, don't worry. I'm just kidding. Substantia nigra is affected, and if it's affected, is in charge of the whole production of dopamine. And so we have little by little less ability to control our body. So among the causes that they say, remember guys last week, genetic factors and environmental factors. That's the favorite researcher excuse for I have no reason. I have no idea. So anyways, they say that genetic factors may be mutation of certain genes that inhibit dopamine production, but they have no idea which. So they are just thinking about that is a possibility. Others are exposure to chemicals and toxics, traumas or head injuries that you may have, and that may affect the substantia nigra. Also age and gender. Aging and being male are risk factors, a higher risk factor for Parkinson than others. So females are relatively safer than men. Here again, the researchers say that it seems like, based on observational studies that they did, that the estrogens produced by women have a sort of protective like function that allows to let's say have the effect of the reduction in dopamine lower and later. So the onset of Parkinson is later in female because of this protective action of the estrogens, and also the effect is usually milder. Like in many cases, they have tremors, females, but tremors are considered really mild effects. Like the other effects are way heavier, and males usually reach that point faster and more often than female, apparently for this estrogen effect. And then occupation. They realize that people who have more unimplied in vigorous physical activity occupations have lower risk for developing. These are longitudinal studies, observational studies, that they just check the association between type of occupation and onset of Parkinson. It seems that it can, if you have a work that allows you to be active, you are more protected. And there where we go also, that's why it's important to work on physical activity. The early signs are these tremors. So when you have these typical tremors on the hand, you cannot keep the fine control of movement, also at rest. One is called micrographia, not the fact that if you write very small letters, don't worry. For instance, I've been writing very small letters for a long time. My granny called my calligraphy bag's poop, because it's so small that it looks like a bag's poop. But when a person change their style of writing from normal writing to very, very small writing, it might be a sign of difficulties in controlling the fine movements of the finger. Loss of smell. Apparently, researchers found out that the loss of smell is associated with mostly the smelling of bananas, pickles, or licorice, mostly. So hey, I don't smell any more bananas. That can be a sign. I cannot smell any more pickles. That's also, but not associated with other loss of smell in other areas. sudden movements during sleep. All of a sudden, people like do several times a night movements during the sleep, but not like, you know, everybody has those movements sometimes, but repeated may be a sign. Troubles already moving or walking, but one of the most common signs is the facial masking. I don't know if you ever heard about that. Person looks really angry and in bad mood when they are not, and that's because dopamine controls everything, also the way we control our muscles for the expressivity. So when you have difficulties in control the muscles of fine movement and expression, so you can't control the expression of your face even. And in some cases, the facial masking is a very common Parkinson's disease symptom. And then little by little, there is also the worsening of the standing up posture. You cannot even stand up in a proper way because you have lost control of the muscles. What's for us? Well, exercise is beneficial only if done regularly. You can't stop, you can't do exercise once and then stop it. You should do it actually 4 or 5 times per week for about 30, 40 minutes. That's the only way to really keep the exercise good, with a good effect. Intensity can be 70, 80% of the maximum heart rate. And then strength and flexibility always included. Strength, obviously not, we are not talking about power, but about resistance. But it should be always included together with flexibility because stiffness is also one of the issues that may appear. One of the main and let's say alternative strategies that they suggest to use is the so-called Richard, random practices. So exercise planning with random practice. Random practice is constant change in tempo, in pace, activity, and direction of the exercise. So that's a very uncommon recommendation that I can give you other than yoga and stretching, tennis, swimming. These are the common that you'll find. One recommendation that I can give you that is suggested by research that is untraditional is this random practices. Why are random practices useful? Because you want to have them constantly being attentive, concentrated on the activity, because that's also part of the affection of the problems that appear with Parkinson's disease. And because changing the pace of the activity, the type of activity constantly also forces the person with Parkinson's disease to readapt the movement at all times. And that's very good for continuing using their muscle in full. So random practices, what's up? Okay. Okay. Random practices are very good together with the dancing activities because they imply rhythm, pace, and the person has to follow that pace and that rhythm, and that's very important for Parkinson's disease. Guys, I have a very short poop issue. My kid wants me and only me to clean her butt, so I gotta go. I'll come back in a second. But meanwhile, you can think about questions on Parkinson's. Where are you? Mishi, can you check what she needs? Babu viene fra un pochino. Done. That's one of the nice things in life. And everybody went away, so we're having a forced break. But everybody, I have only like 5 persons I can see, and 4 are out. Oh, there are people coming back. People coming back. Everything good. Poop, butt clean. It's wonderful when your kid wants you and only you for cleaning their butt. Feel like the sense of worth. Anyways, let's jump into, and then we go back to others, but let's jump into the cognitive disorders, not before telling you something about epilepsy. I won't tell you the whole stuff because we won't have time for that, unfortunately, but when you go over epilepsy, one of the most common things that may happen when you work with patients or with people is that they believe that exercise triggers seizures. Seizures are those events that happen when you have epilepsy. So it can be a focal seizure, like you have a blinking moment, or a global seizure when you are lose consciousness and you have those extreme reactions that you probably, unfortunately, may know in epilepsy. And there is a huge stream of belief that says that physical activity increases the risk of seizures. That's a myth. Right? That's not true. Research never showed that. Actually, the opposite. Research showed that physical activity is only good for epilepsy. So if you find patients that tell you, but physical activity, I can't do exercise because I'm epileptic and I have a higher risk for seizures. No, that's not true. Now, if you choose the wrong activities, that might be the issue. For instance, don't do combat sports. Don't do sports of adventure sports that may imply the risk of hitting your head or this stuff. That's what not recommended, because you have to protect your head and the seizures start in your head and you don't want really that to happen. But in general, it's not true that they trigger epilepsy, that physical activity trigger epilepsy. And that's why we can work with that very easily and very conveniently. Anyways, jumping into the cognitive, I wanted to have time to talk about it because cognitive are probably one of Austrians' health main issues currently. There are 3 groups of them. We will just see quickly 2 of them. The 3 groups are psychological, cognitive disorders. Cognitive disorders refer to those disorders that affect memory, attention. For instance, Alzheimer's is what we're talking about today. Psychological disorders are those disorders that affect the way we perceive ourselves. So the way we perceive ourselves, we think that we are, for instance, bulimia, anorexia. You see yourself as fat or you perceive yourself as fat is considered a psychological disorder. You perceive your person and the relation between your person and the outside in a way that is not correct. And then there are the sensory disorders. The sensory disorders refer to when you have difficulties in receiving properly the messages from the outside for processing them. For instance, visual impairment. Can't see well what happens outside. So you cannot process very well the environment if you can't see well. So visual impairment, hearing impairment, when you can't hear well. So these are the sensory disorders. All of them, even if they are different categories, they all belong to the main category of mental health diseases. So today, and as I said, in Austria, probably the most common group of diseases is the mental, according to the Austrian health system, a part of the cardiovascular. So for instance, I have some data for you that may be of interest. For instance, 25% of Austrian adolescents suffer from mental health problems, approximately, but only less than 50% really seek medical help. And there was a huge increase of cases of disability from work due to mental conditions, so tripled according to the last data report, which was from the 2015, and it's also costly. So mental issues also cost like 3.6% of the global product of per year of Austria, in terms of lost productivity because people are less productive, in terms of healthcare because people need healthcare, and all the related issues to that. So it's unfortunately a common disease. I don't want to go here, but I want to go here. Alzheimer. I think it's interesting for you to know, or at least it is interesting for me, so you have to listen to that, how Alzheimer works. Because Alzheimer is very particular. Like it's unfortunate, it's an irreversible brain disorder, so we can't stop it. But we can work with people and we can propose exercise at different stages to have them live better their life, better quality of life during the period from the onset until, unfortunately, the death. It's a type of dementia that originally was not even classified as a particular one, but it was more known into the group of dementia. But then little by little, our knowledge of dementias got better, and we were able to identify several different disorders. So the global disorder is the dementia. It affects different parts of our cognitive skills. Alzheimer is a particular one in which the neurons associated with body functionality are either damaged or destroyed, so they can't work anymore. And so little by little, the person loses control of the body until they cannot even walk, or even they cannot even swallow, because they have no control anymore or any part of their body. What happens in the Alzheimer? So there are a couple of things that happen in our body with aging. One is that we produce we eliminate proteins in our brain because we don't need them anymore, and that's completely normal. There is an enzyme that is called APP that cuts these proteins that we eliminate. They're called beta amyloid. Beta amyloid refers to pieces of proteins that are old and we need to eliminate. So we have these proteins that are old in our neurons. We need to eliminate them. The neurons basically put these pieces of old proteins out. So they are released in the middle of the brain, in between neurons, in the spaces between neurons. And then there is this enzyme that is called APP, that cuts these pieces of proteins in smaller parts, and these smaller parts are absorbed by our brain. So they are ejected by our body. This is what happens normally. They thought in the beginning that Alzheimer depended on this, and in partly it's true, but it's also true that an elderly without Alzheimer, if you open their brain, you'll find these beta amyloids. Just that the beta amyloids are in a very small part, and they are small pieces. In some cases, this enzyme APP that cuts the beta amyloid in smaller part is unable to cut them well. So the beta amyloids in between our neurons become huge, and our brain cannot remove them because they are too big. So we cannot absorb this beta amyloid, and they remain in between our neurons. Since these pieces of protein are very sticky, imagine that you put something extremely sticky in between things. What happens? Imagine that you put a sticky liquid in the middle of, or let's make an example of my kids. Let's have the kids put their hands inside the ice cream. Those ice cream that are like sort of produce a lot of liquid. What happened to the fingers? They can't really move very well because they are all sticky, so they get sticky, right? They cannot move the hands very well because of this sticky ice cream. So the same happens for the beta amyloid and the neurons. The beta amyloid remains there, cannot be washed out, is sticky, gets all the neurons together and stuck together in this sticky environment, and the neurons don't work well anymore. So the neurons stop working well, and eventually they die. And obviously, with neurons dying in our brain, our functionality also is reduced. This is one of the things, like they find in the brain of people with Alzheimer, higher amount and higher size of beta amyloid. The other is the tau protein. This happens outside, the beta amyloid happens outside of the neurons, but inside the neurons there are these so-called tau proteins. The tau proteins are proteins that we need to produce, because basically the tau proteins is are like signals. They signal the molecules and substances inside our neurons where to go. So they are, imagine them as arrows. You take a path in the mountains, and you have those signs on the trees that guide you. So that's the tau proteins. They guide the substances inside the neuron to move in a way that allows the neurons to work properly. Now, in Alzheimer's in Alzheimer's people's brain neurons, these tau proteins start ensemble in an improper way. Usually, instead of being in a like line, they are in a C form. So this C form makes, basically what it does is change completely the environment inside the neuron. And it's like you go to a path in the mountain and you find every 5 meters a direction that is completely misleading. What happens? You probably get disoriented and you get lost. Same for the substances in the neuron. They don't have any more the signs on the trees, or better say, they have the sign of the tree on the trees, but they are completely wrong. So they go up and down the neuron and they don't know where to go. And eventually they go the wrong way. And so that obviously those substances are used by the cell to work properly. So the neurons stop working properly. And this is what happens in Alzheimer's people, in people with Alzheimer's brain. Is it clear so far, guys?
Yes.
These two events make the brain working properly, and they are known as plaques and tangles of tau protein and plaques of beta amyloid. Another thing is that they discovered recently is the apolipoprotein E4. If you see it in the presentation, is a gene allocation. So apolipoprotein is a protein that is in charge of this stuff, tau protein, beta amyloid, etc. They don't know really well how it works, but there are 4 different phenotypes of this gene. There is APOE4, APOE3, APOE2, APOE1. If a person has one phenotype of APOE4, has a risk way higher to develop Alzheimer's than any other person. If you don't have an APOE4, apparently you won't develop Alzheimer's. They don't know the mechanism, but they mapped this gene, and they discovered that the specific APOE4, so that form of the gene, increases the risk for you to develop Alzheimer's. The others don't. That's something at least that they discovered. Obviously, also lifestyle may be a risk. Increased risk with people that have a heart disease and stroke, so they are associated with more risk to develop Alzheimer's. High blood pressure, diabetes, and obesity are also risks for that. For us, what do we have to do with these people? Physical activity depends a lot on the stage at which we work with the person. In early stages of Alzheimer's, you can basically do anything. 150 minutes per week is the general recommendation for healthy adults or healthy elderly. You can break it down into bouts of 15 minutes twice a day. So I have 30 minutes per day divided in 2 times 15 minutes. That would be okay. In later stage, unfortunately, we still don't have guidelines for the physical activity because there is really there are no clear instructions, because people with Alzheimer's at later stage have difficulties even in walking or moving or doing anything. Usually they are in the house and they cannot do much more out of that. So in case, intervention for us would be in the place, going to the person and work out with them in their home place. We can't expect them to move to the gym, for instance. If you can, well, wonderful, but most cases have difficulties in doing that. Aerobic training, the typical strength, exercise, flexibility, and balance in early stages. Keeping an eye always on pain and sickness, even after exercising, to be sure that if there is a pain or feeling of sickness, even right after exercising, that's a good reason for you to suggest those subjects to go and get medical advice, to go immediately for a medical check. Before starting any type of exercise program, obviously you would need to assess the status regarding heart problems, if they have extra problems with blood pressure, if they feel angina, chest pain, etc., all this stuff. In terms of practice, there are really typical, the typical recommendation that you can hear from everything. In early stages, ball games is very good. Also, Tai Chi and yoga. Tai Chi and yoga are like the helper of all exercise therapists, because they work very well with everything. Like if they ask you what would be good for this, you reply Tai Chi and yoga, and 99.9% you got it properly. But obviously, that I'm not here to give you the common answer. Like, yeah, Tai Chi and yoga, wonderful, but what else? So ball games, research says that ball games, swimming, dance, also activities that people don't think they're activity, housework, it's very good. People in many cases don't even realize that they can be active at home in different ways, and that doesn't mean buying dumbbells and working out at home, but there are many ways. If you have a garden and you're gardening, you are active, and you can be even moderate with a moderate intensity. So based on the patient's conditions, house conditions, you can also prepare a program that includes activities in the house that they can do: gardening, cleaning, etc. In later stages, the only thing that have been worked out so far that I know, but you might find more in your research review, changing position. So since these people have difficulties in moving from home, some of the things are recommended are, for instance, sitting and standing from the chair where they were sitting. Every now and then, standing up and getting back, standing up and getting back. Walking from room to room. So tell them to change room every now and then, or tell who's caring of these persons to literally hey, take them from the kitchen to the living room every 1 hour or every 2 hours. Moving to sit on a different chair. So, hey, come here and move here close to me. That maybe not even offered as an exercise for them, but if there is someone who cares for them, just to let them move this way. In some case, like, you are lucky if they move that way, because in some cases, really the disease is so strong that it's even difficult for them to do that. Postural muscle training and all this stuff must be worked at all times. Here I put you a reference for if you want to know more. My daughter coming out from the door. I don't know if you can hear that. That's the second one, the one that doesn't want me to clean her butt. Go washing your hands. So I put here a reference, not a reference, but a link. Alzheimer's.org.uk is a British association that work with Alzheimer, and they have also extra recommendations for exercise and physical activity in case you want to know more about that. Guys, questions? Apart of when is this over? In a few minutes.
Sorry.
What's up, Christoph?
I can't hear you anymore. So
Seriously?
good. Now I heard you.
You guys heard me before, or it was only Christoph, or everybody couldn't hear me? I see few of you. Pardon? Mel, did you say what?
Yeah, I could hear you.
Okay. So it's your problem. Don't accuse me, Christoph. I'm sorry. I hope that there is a recording, so hopefully you can go back and check it in there if the recording is good, or in case you can stop me if you cannot hear properly. Anyways, we have another couple of minutes, and then we'll just stop. But I wanted to discuss this last thing with you guys, which is stress and anxiety. Stress and anxiety, main disorders in Austria among the cognitive disorders. Most commonly found, stress and anxiety. So in the case of stress, there are 3 types. One is acute, and this is very common. Like, we can all have, for instance, the stress that you had 5 minutes connecting with my classes. Oh no, again, this Zoom meeting with Armando, I'm stressed. That's completely normal and common. but then it goes away as soon as as soon as we finish talking in this Zoom meeting. The stress should go away, and that's an acute event that is completely normal, and it happens every now and then to everybody. The episodic event is when that happens a bit more regularly. So you have episodes of feeling really stressed for something, and it's not just a moment and that's it, but it happens frequently. That's still in the range of not risky, but keep an eye on it. And then there is the one that is really risky for develops into a disorder, and this is the chronic. The chronic is when you are stressed all the time. Like you can't get rid of the stress, even if there is nothing really that would stress you for real. Yeah, chronic stress. So that's the one that is really dangerous for us, because the other is normal, that it happens every now and then. So acute stress might even be positive for the body to a certain extent, but the chronic is definitely never good. And let me go into the I made a short research on what made people stressed in Austria. So according to the source that I read, money is a major source of stress everywhere around the world, but work and work-related issues is very common. Sleeping time also was one of the main in Austria specifically, like the time that you can dedicate to sleeping. Family responsibilities, for instance, if you have to clean the bath of your kid while you're having a Zoom meeting, that's really stressful. Relationships, and then personal health and house costing and self-pressure, so putting pressure on yourself for the things that you need to do. And that's problems. Problems is probably the least of the problems that I found. But these are all very common based on research stressors, generating stressor. For us, guideline, we discussed it. Oh no, I didn't discuss it with you, I think. But we were mentioning it in another course. Like one of the most important things is, first of all, communication and empathy. So keeping contact with the patients and being able to communicate with them well. That seems to be a very silly thing, but it's very important. Like the way you relate with the patient is sometimes even way more important than how good you are at delivering a program. Like if you are a person that is not really likable, like in your workplace, and you are very good at what you're doing, you may have people not wanting to be with you because they don't like working with you. So having a good relationship with the patients, specifically in the case of stress, is essential, because they want to be in an environment that does not generate more stress, but less stress. Mm-hmm. Another thing is that, well, we know well that the long-term effect of PA on stress is due to better circulation, increased use of oxygen. So all these are stuff that help really out the brain to relax and produce endorphins. So that's the long-term effect. But in general, recommendation are the same as for healthy people. What's interesting for us is that the activity should be always in group and fun. So remember, like try to think about activity that work resistance, endurance, whatever you want to develop with the patients, but don't make it a military system, because they are already stressed. Imagine having someone like us telling them, come on, 51, 52, 53. Man, I'm already stressed. Please don't make me more stressed. So rather prefer activities that are fun and in group. So people tend to not to think about their stressor. Relaxation techniques may be included. Keeping attention high during the exercises. So don't do something that is very, very repetitive, because in the end, the person gets used to it, does it automatically, and the mind flies to the stressor. Like I have a stressing thing in my mind. If the physical activity keeps me busy because I have to think every 5 seconds what I have to do, that's very good. If the physical activity becomes a repetition of a movement all over the time, you probably know it. You go to the gym, if you or you do your favorite physical activity, whatever that is, and you are so used to do that you don't even think I have to move this, I have to do that. You do it and you think about your things, probably. I go to walk outside with the kids, and well, part of taking care of the kids, I also think about my things. I'm not thinking, okay, I have to walk this way. So you need to have activities that keep their mind busy. Changing routines is important precisely for this, because if I'm switching routines, then I'm also helping them to rethink about, keep attention on the activity. Oh, there is a new activity. Wait a minute. How does it work? I have to think about it, so I don't think about the stressor factor. Some of the activities that apparently are traditionally very useful are biking, swimming, tennis, dancing, rowing. I would suggest you to remove to do biking, swimming, yes, but to work more on the tennis and dancing, because they are relatively more mentally demanding, in terms that the environment may change constantly. The swimming, the walking, the biking, if you know the path, is more, like, say, it's more homogeneous. The tennis, you have an opponent, so you have to run, and also is in company, so it's always good to do this stuff. Weightlifting may be recommended, but as I said, rather prefer the fun activities and games, etc. Important, short, attainable goals. Why do we want to establish short, attainable goals with person with stress? Guys, question for you. Why do you think it's important to establish goals, like objectives that are short term, and reachable?
Because if they not reach them, they may be disappointed and even more stressed.
Correct. So one of the major mistakes is making, like, fixing goals that are too big, and they get stressed because they cannot reach them. And why short? Well, it's connected anyways, because imagine that you have a 6-month goal for the person. You probably have it if you plan well the activity, but you don't tell them, because 6 months is just too much time. Allows them to think too much about, oh, in 6 months I have to reach that. That's stressful, especially because in 6 months you will probably set a goal that is quite high. So rather than having a single goal that is attainable in 6 months, have like 6 goals that are attainable in 1 month each, because also the success in attaining one goal, in reaching one objective, makes them even more enjoying the activity and less stressed. Does it make sense, guys? So you have in mind a long-term objective, but break it down in small objectives. Let's reach this in the next month, and then the following month. So they see that the objectives are right there, and they are reachable, and they can reach them relatively quick. So they have the satisfaction of having reached the objective. So this is and very similarly, because we are running out of time, very similarly we act with people with anxiety. There are different types of anxieties, but regardless of what's the source of anxiety, one of the main things that research has discovered lately is do not do physical activity prefer moderate and vigorous activity over low intensity physical activity. Why? Because the low intensity physical activity allows you to think about the thing that makes you anxious. So exactly as in stress, the original myth was low activity because high intensity activity makes me even more stressed or more anxious. No, researchers demonstrated the opposite. Low activity is what makes you more anxious, because you have time to think about the things of your life that make you anxious or stressful. So in that case, stress and anxiety go together with keeping people busy with high to moderate to vigorous intensity. And another huge recommendation of anxiety, similarly to stress, fun activities are better. Important thing when you do competitions or competition-like activities, never use eliminations. You know what I mean, elimination? You have a group. The group comes for 1 hour to work with you. We do not a physical elimination, right? You don't kill them. I meant that you have a game, let's say soccer game, 3 versus 3 soccer game. So we have all this competition, this tournament. So first round. At the end of the first round, there are winners and losers. Losers, you are out, sit down and wait until the end of the tournament. Wrong. Mistake. You get the people way anxious, you get the people way low in morale. So elimination, this works exactly like for kids physical activity. This is a recommendation that I always give for kids in school. Never use elimination. So use activities that are fun, even competition activities, but find a way to have everybody working all the time. So no, because you lost, you're out. But okay, so now the tournament continues this way or the other way, but everybody is engaged all the time. So anxious and stressed, fun activities, games with other people, even competition. Never use elimination because that's the wrongest thing that you can do. Questions, guys? Enough? Basta? Staci? You told me how it was enoch? No, how it is in German. Basta. Enough.
Genug.
Enoch, not enoch. Enoch.
Es reicht. Would be better.
Es reicht. Okay.
Yeah.
It's more educated or what? Es reicht.
No, it's more clear, more straight. So
Okay.
now it is reicht.
Okay. Es reicht. Sounds good.
Yeah.
So if you have questions, go ahead. If you don't have questions about it now, but you can have it later, you know that you can write me. I will just close up today. Like, we still meet next week, but it's not mandatory. It's just going over things. And if you have any doubts or any questions, we can check it together. As always, I record this and then post it on Inolat. If you cannot hear it well, let me know, because there are other ways also to send the file. Maybe YouTube as a niche. I don't know. I have some issues with uploading it in YouTube. I can send it to you personally using WeTransfer, for instance. It's a common, like, online way to send files that are too big. Okay. Your yes. I assume that is also, I don't have any questions. So guys, the presentation has been already there for in the last week. Anything else, please write me an email or communicate with me through OLAT or in any ways you want. But I still see you next week if you need to have, if you have any doubt that pops out while you're working on the activities for me in this week or even in weeks before. All right.
Yeah.
All right, then I'll talk to you. I'll see you next week, maybe, hopefully. Oh, wait, let me stop. Wait, let me stop sharing so I can see you all. Finally, now I can see you all. Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Good to see you again. Bye. Stay healthy.
You too.